Okay, let's take a look at creating a master test render scene that you can save out and reuse. Now before we begin creating the scene, we're going to need an HDR Eye, which is a high dynamic range image, and we'll use that to help light the scene, create our environment, and we'll use it for the reflections. So here's an example. If I bring up my image editor by hitting F6 and double click on the image, you can see the HDR Eye. It's a 360 degree image with lots of information. So we're going to need to get that. Now if you don't have one of those, what you can do is you can go and do a Google search for free HDR Eye, and you'll see this link here, SIBL archive. Click on that and that'll bring you to this site, hdrlabs.com, and as you can see there's a whole host of HDR Eyes you can download. If you put your mouse over the top, you can see all the details, so check that out. So to follow along with this tutorial, what you want to do is you want to grab this one here, the skate park, click on that and save that out, and unzip that, and if you go to load, this is what you get. You get a whole stack of images, and if I change the views, you can see the HDR Eyes and some reference images. What we want to use is the 3K one, which is a 14 meg one, the largest one there. So now that we've got that in there, the next step that I'm going to do is edit this image, and I'm going to turn the saturation all the way down because I don't want the color information for this scene, just the lighting and the reflections. So we'll close that off. Okay, so now let's start building the scene. So the first thing we need to do is create a ground plane, and you can either load one in or simply just go to the modeling tools, under geometry, click ground plane, and we'll make that 50 meters by 50 meters, and I strongly recommend you save this out so you don't save over the top of it. Hit OK. Next step, we need a reference object, so we'll go over and create a sphere, leave it as default. I'm just going to add 24 to the segments just to smooth it out a little bit. Hit OK. Now I'm going to hit F5 to bring up the surface editor, and I'm going to select the sphere and just smooth it out, and while I'm here I'm going to hit F8, brings up my presets, go over to metal and double click on chrome and hit that. Okay, so now that we've got our objects in place, let's start adjusting stuff. So if I hit the 2 key, and this brings up the top view, what we want to do is we want to select the light and we want to make some adjustments to it. So over here we'll go -8, then go 8, and then go -8 again. Okay, as far as the rotation is concerned, we can leave that. Now what we want to do is we want to clone this light and move it over to the right, so Control C, make one clone. Now in the rotations we'll just add a minus to the heading, enter, enter, and if we go over to the position, we'll just remove the minus in front of the X, hit delete, enter, 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 and now we've got two lights either side of our object. Okay, now if we go over to the camera, choose the camera, what we need to do is we need to make some changes for that. And I'll put 0, 2 meters, -6 meters, and if we go to rotation, for the pitch just make it 10 degrees, and there we have our scene and lights and cameras set up. Okay, so now that we've got the scene set up, what we can do is go through the settings. So if we go over to items, under Windows, you've got render globals and background options. I've created a shortcut just to make things easy for myself, so what we'll do is we go over to the render globals and set them up. So if we go over to general, we can just leave that as it is. If we go over to render, what we want to do is under shading samples and light samples, we want to make that either 8 or 16. I'll make it 16, and what this does is it smooths out all the shadows. So I'll leave that like that. If we go over to global illumination settings, we'll enable radiosity. You can either leave it as Monte Carlo or backdrop. I'm just going to leave it as backdrop. Now we'll pretty much leave the rest as it is. Now for the camera, all I do is set the maximum samples to something like, oh, I don't know, 6 or 10, it's up to you, and leave the rest as it is. And then we go over to the lights. We need to make some changes in here. So we've got our two lights. What we want to do is we want to change the lights to area lights, and we want to give them 60% intensity, and do that to both area and 60. Okay, so that's done. As far as the output, we can leave that. We can close that off. Now let's have a look at the backdrop settings. Now for the backdrop, what we want to do is we want to change the background color, and I want to set that to 50. Now before I click OK, I just want to show you real quick. I've set up some different colors here, different shades of grey, 40, 50, 100 and so on. The way you do that, it's very simple. Let me just delete this. What you do is you just go over to add, new, name it, okay, select your color, click on that, and then add the color. So with regards to all the greys, we just simply go in and just type in the values, okay, and add the color. So I've gone ahead and done all that. So what we want to do is we want to choose 50 for the grey, or you can just right click and slide this left and right until you get the value you require. This doesn't really play part in our scene, it's more so just for our OpenGL reference. So moving right along, next step is to go to add environment and choose image world, and this is where we load up our HDR Eye. Double click on that, and for the image we'll select that HDR Eye. And now what I want to do is I want to rotate in the heading the offset 180 degrees, and the reason we'll do that is if I go to VPR, you should be able to see now that at 180 degrees we've got our image facing us correctly. If we set it to 0, we basically get the seam of the image. So make that 180 so it faces the correct way. So that part's done. As far as volumetrics, we'll leave that for a second, we'll come back to that. If we go over to our compositing, what we want to do is we want to use background color. So check that, and for the color I want that to be 140. So hit OK. So if we do a VPR again, what you'll see is that we've got our 140 background, and we've got a white ground plane. So what you want to do is hit F5, and for the ground plane we want to change the ground plane to 100 and hit OK. Now we get a even ground plane and backdrop. Now for the VPR, if we go to the VPR settings up here, what we want to do is we want to uncheck draft mode. Now when you uncheck draft mode, the rendering directly relates to the amount of passes that you have in your camera. Okay, so the higher the passes, maximum samples you have, the longer it takes VPR to render it, and the lower and the quicker it takes. So just wanted to point that out. Now you can see here that the shadows for our area lights are reasonably soft, but they could be a lot softer. So what you want to do is select the lights, and for the scale, what we want to do is we want to scale that up to 3, 3 and 3. As you can see now, the shadow on the right is a lot softer than the one on the left, so we want to select that one as well and make that 3, 3, 3. Okay, so now we've got some nice shadows. Now if we go back to the backdrop settings, what we want to do now is address this harsh line in the back. Now most people, myself included, create these weird backgrounds and drop them in and get all sorts of weird stuff happening, and setting this scene up the way I have avoids all that. Now to get rid of that seam, it's very simple. We go to our volumetrics, and for the fog type I choose non-linear 2. You can use linear or whatever, but non-linear 2 just gives a nicer transition. Okay, so for the minimum distance from the camera, let's just make that 15 meters, and for the maximum distance we'll make that 30 meters. Okay, and then if we check use background color, we've now removed that harsh line and created a really nice transition. So if you go to your display options, let's just go into our wireframe shade. If you go into your display options and check OpenGL fog, hang on, is it in this one here? Sorry, in our shaded solid. If in a display options we've got OpenGL fog, if you turn that on and off, you can see your fog without having to render it. So that's all done now, and if we hit VPR, we've pretty much got our scene set up. Our default scene, you can save that out and reuse that and bring in objects. Now if you want to change the color of, or sorry, the shade of the background, it's very simple. What we'll do is shift click onto the ground plane and also bring up our backdrop options. Now what we want to do is, for our ground plane color, we want to make that 50, and for our under compositing for our background, we want to make that 40 and hit OK. Or is it, sorry, 50 for the background and 40 for our ground plane, and there we have it. There we have a darker scene. Now at this stage you can either go ahead and click on the VPR save button, or you could just render this out as it is and save it out. But if, say, you wanted to render out this object without any background, just with an alpha channel and the shadows, what you do is if you shift click on the ground plane, which brings up the surface editor, for the ground plane we'll make the color completely black, and under the advanced tab for the alpha channel we'll select shadow density. Okay, so now what happens is if we do a render, okay, now you can see that we've got our sphere, we've got the black ground plane, and we've still got our grey background. But if you go to the image and check the alpha, you'll notice that we've only got our sphere and our shadows. All the rest of the information is ignored. And then we can just save that out, file, save out as a PNG 32, which saves out the alpha information as well. Now if you find that when you use this image your shadows are too dark, what you can do is once again bring up the ground plane surface properties, and for the color, what you can do is just brighten it up a little bit. Now if we hit F9 we pause the video, but if we go over to render and do render frame, once again you can see that we've got all our greys in the background, and you'd think that they would come up, but under image for alpha you can notice now we've still got our empty backdrop, but this time our shadows are not black, they're more of a grey reflecting the colour underneath, or the ground plane. So that's pretty much it for setting up a test render scene. You can then save it out, load it up, and just drop in a new object, do a quick render of it, and send it off to your clients for proofing. Okay, with the magic of video editing, I went ahead and loaded up a pre-made scene like the one we just made. Now this one's slightly more advanced, so if you notice in the timeline it goes from 0 to 20, and if I go along the timeline from 0 it's light, and as I go along the timeline the background gets darker and darker and even more darker. And the way I did this is pretty simple. Basically In our render globals under compositing, I enveloped the background color, and if we go to the surface editor for our ground, I've also enveloped the color of the ground. So as we move along, the two match and we can have our varying backgrounds. Okay, so now that we've set up the scene, let's take a look at some objects and how they might look in this scene. Okay, so first of all I'll turn off the sphere, and I've got another camera set up that's a little bit closer. So we can use this scene to drop in some character objects, and if we have a look at them, you can see they're lit up quite nice. We've got some really nice shadows, and like I said, this is for test renders, so it's pretty good if you ask me. And if we drop in some vehicles, particularly those kind of vehicles that have got chrome in them, you can see if we use the lighter background, we get a slightly different result. I'll just turn the balls on in the background. And VPR, it's doing its thing. We can go over and save them out. One other thing I want to point out is if we hit the E key, what that does is it basically crops our viewport to the size of our camera. Now if you hit the E key once, what it does is it'll render out via VPR, it'll render out our camera, but it'll also render out this grey. If you hit the E key once again, what it'll do is it'll render out our image, but the outside will be black. If we go to the wireframe, you can see that we've got our limiting. So 1, 2, 3. So there we have it. So for a test render scene, this is pretty good. If we want, we can make it darker, so we can make our objects stand out a lot more. And that's pretty much it. So I hope you liked it. I hope it's helped, and gives you an idea how to set up a scene so you can do some nice renders with some nice shadows and some nice lighting. So I hope it's helped. I'll see you next time.